Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: China focus on middle powers, EU scales back Ukraine timetable, Burkina Faso severs diplomatic ties with France, anti-migrant violence escalates in South Africa, India plans for a weaker monsoon debt, an AI boom raises global risks, and Philippines leads solar push. Starting with politics, Xi Jinping hosted more than 17 leaders in 2026, as middle powers look beyond US. Bangladesh's new prime minister was the latest world leader to visit Beijing this year, as the Chinese president builds his influence and economic ties. Xi has also welcomed leaders from Myanmar, Serbia, Brunei, Tajikistan and Pakistan, along with the US and Russia. Many of the visiting leaders, including Canada's Prime Minister Carney, framed their trips as a chance for middle power countries to chart an independent relationship with Beijing against a backdrop of an increasingly inconsistent US. EU scales back Ukraine's accession timetable due to Hungarian resistance. Faced with renewed resistance from Hungary, the EU has been forced to change plans and now aims to unblock 2 rather than 5 accession clusters with Ukraine and Moldova before the summer break. The revised timetable in Brussels aims at unlocking Cluster 6, external relations, and Cluster 2, internal market, before the summer break, with the remaining 3 tackled gradually afterwards. Burkina Faso severs diplomatic ties with France. Relations with its former colonial ruler worsened after Captain Traoré seized power in a coup in 2022 and pursued largely anti-Western policies. Burkina Faso, like its neighbor Mali, has been battling an Islamist insurgency for over a decade, often alongside French forces deployed in the region. Soon after he took power, Traoré expelled French troops and pivoted towards China and Russia. Keiko Fujimori secures unbeatable lead in Peru election. Razor-thin election results have given the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori victory in the presidential runoff, reviving the family's political dynasty and reopening divisions after years of instability. Iraqi security forces arrest 47 officials in anti-corruption crackdown. Dozens of prominent politicians, lawmakers and officials have been arrested across Baghdad as part of an unprecedented anti-corruption crackdown ordered by new Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi. Moving to stories in conflict, South Korea to expand drone and counter-drone capabilities to counter North Korea. It plans to produce 60,000 drones by 2029 for deployment across the Army, Navy, Air Force and Marines, aiming to make drones a standard item for individual soldiers. It will also distribute tens of thousands of unmanned systems across frontline units. Kenya's Gen Z protests still echo 2 years on. The anniversary was marked by a heavy police presence in Nairobi as young Kenyan protesters said the key issues, youth unemployment, cost of living and governance failures, remain largely unaddressed. Israeli former leaders and security chiefs threaten legal action over West Bank. 2 former prime ministers, former heads of all the Israeli security services, former judges, a Nobel laureate and the country's most revered living novelist were among the signatories to a letter of protest against their government over support for Jewish terrorism and an ideology of ethnic cleansing in the occupied West Bank. Fuel shortages spread to more parts of Russia amid Ukrainian attacks. Fuel shortages have expanded from Russian-annexed Crimea to nearby parts of southern Russia, and even to the capital Moscow in the wake of repeated Ukrainian attacks on fuel refineries. Motorists in nearly all of Russia are limited in the amount of fuel they can now buy, with particularly severe restrictions imposed in Russian-occupied Ukraine, much of southern Russia and Siberia. Anti-migrant violence escalates in South Africa. New civic movements working alongside established anti-migrant vigilante groups are demanding the removal of undocumented migrants and tighter border enforcement, setting their own deadline of June 30th. The protests come against a backdrop of social pressures, with unemployment at 33%, inequality widening, and municipal services unreliable. Now for the latest economics news. AI boom and fragilities raise global risks. Global pressures from rising public debt to financial fragilities and the sustainability of the AI boom are increasing risks, underscoring the need for disciplined policymaking, according to the Bank for International Settlements. The Central Bank Umbrella Group's annual economic report warned of a complex mix of vulnerabilities, including strained fiscal positions, lingering supply shocks, and the risk of a renewed bout of stubbornly high inflation. Ford hires back some human engineers after AI fell short. In a bid to cut costs and boost productivity, the US carmaker adopted AI across some parts of its operations, including for quality checks, but the firm has rehired more than 300 quality inspectors in recent years to make up for the pitfalls of automated systems. US May, inflation rises 0.5% to annual 4.2%, highest in 3 years. As war in the Middle East drove energy prices higher, data suggested a broader problem across categories, with core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy costs, also rising last month. Despite rising prices, overall consumer spending in the US remained resilient, thanks to higher tax refunds and rising stock prices. Polestar blocked from selling cars in US over national security concerns. The Chinese-owned electric vehicle company based in Sweden is withdrawing from the US market and will focus on European sales after the US government banned its high-tech cars. Polestar, majority owned by China's Geely Holding, is the first casualty of a rule instigated by the previous US administration that restricts the import and sale of cars with connected vehicle technology linked to China beginning with the 2027 model year. China's critical metal imports rise 60%, while exports restricted. China is building supplies of critical metals used in a range of high-tech products by boosting imports while limiting exports. Turning to development. World's fastest supercomputer now from China. It now outranks its US and German counterparts as the world's most powerful, which is the first time since 2017 that a Chinese computer has topped a list sometimes viewed as a measure of a nation's technological prowess. Scientists behind the Top 500 project said the Lineshine computer at China's National Supercomputing Center achieved 2.198 exaflops, meaning it can perform more than 2 quintillion calculations per second. Russian warships remain in the English Channel. A Russian frigate has been in the English Channel since the end of April, evidently to escort dark fleet tankers carrying Russian oil. The goal is to protect them from the ship seizures now being carried out by the British as well as the French government. Child malnutrition in Nepal rising since aid cuts. A government survey of more than 1 million children found wasting rates as high as 12.3% in one province, well above the WHO threshold for immediate intervention, reversing decades of progress that had cut under 5 mortality by 72% between 1996 and 2022. The withdrawal of $72 million in USAID funding has left nutrition programs covering nearly 9 million people largely unfunded, with $5 million in replacement donors so far reaching only a fraction of the original target population. Philippines leads push for solar as power prices rise sharply. It is the world's biggest spender on solar panels since the war in Iran started. A median household spends around 12% of monthly income on electricity. The Philippines is one of the few countries in Southeast Asia with barely any power subsidies, and its residential power prices are the highest in the region. Only Singapore comes close, but its citizens' average purchasing power is nearly 13 times higher. Nigeria, to create state police forces to address rural shortages. A bill passed through Parliament would pave the way for mass recruitment of volunteers to oppose bandit groups, jihadist organizations, and other armed non-state threats. In recent years, terrorist attacks, clashes between farmers and herders, as well as kidnappings for ransom, have impacted economic growth and productivity in many parts of the country. Finally, our social news, where safe drinking water is out of reach. Access to safe drinking water has improved dramatically over the past few decades, yet more than 2 billion people still lack safely managed drinking water services at home. Access exceeds 99% across much of Europe, North America, and Australia, but remains below 20% in several low-income countries, including Chad, the Central African Republic, and Benin. Bloomberg. Oracle cuts 21,000 jobs as it embraces AI. The software and cloud computing firm says it had around 141,000 full-time employees, down about 13% from about 162,000 workers at the same time last year, part of a wider trend among tech firms as they spend hundreds of billions of dollars on building AI infrastructure like data centers. Oracle said the deployment of AI technologies across operations had resulted and may continue to result in reductions to its workforce. Droughts are transforming the Turkish landscape with large sinkholes. In central Turkey, especially the Konya Plain, one of the country's main farming regions, close to 700 sinkholes have appeared in recent years. Some are tens of meters wide and very deep, forming suddenly in farmland. They're increasing rapidly compared with the past, which is why scientists describe it as a landscape-scale transformation, not just isolated geological events. India plans for a weaker monsoon. A strong El Niño forecast has prompted authorities to identify 111 districts with limited irrigation as priority intervention zones, with nearly half of India's farmland relying entirely on seasonal rainfall. The stakes extend beyond harvests. The June to September monsoon replenishes drinking water reserves and underpins the livelihoods of more than 260 million agricultural workers. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.